this very kind introduction. And of course, I need to thank also Boaz as the vice president of INASWE. So we are kind of colleagues over there, and yeah. So I think the INASWE is really the best working regional network we have in the INASWE, and yeah, it's easy to say. No, it says a lot. So you're the kind of advocatus diaboli over there. Beware that you are not part of the rejected knowledge there. No, to be honest, and to be serious, I think INASWE is really a very good cooperation. Also in the way things are organized. Pragmatic, easily, not with a big Ben-Gurion, but it works. And I'm glad to be here, not for the first time in the INASWE group. And yeah, thanks a lot for keeping on, to everybody who is involved, for keeping on this group. I think it's really important. What I want to present now at that point of the day is, as Yossi said, only a few actually theses. Which are extremely general, maybe too general for our topic we want to discuss later, but we will see. Maybe they help. Actually, because it's not easy to present theses, I decided to project them or partly here. So if you want, you can follow here a bit, and you see the structure. You do not have to read the text because I read it, but you can see the structure more or less. So you have a little help from my friends. Okay, as a brief introduction to this workshop, let me address its topic in a rather unusual, maybe even inappropriate way, not inductively by history and examples, but in the aphoristic and fragmentary genre of theses. These are in their form radical generalizations, abstractions, reductions and contractions, while in their function they are pointed positions, claims and conclusions. In this way, theses are contrary to linear historical narration as well as to systematic theoretical argumentation. In contrast to both, they perform a process of condensation. The more radical and daring theses are, the further they go in the cutting down of arguments to hyperbolic statements. Let me begin with a short overview, a kind of an introduction to the introduction, concerning the forms and functions of universalism in esotericism. Thesis number 1, or 01. Forms and functions of universalism can be observed, on the one hand, on the general historical level of the cultural context of esotericism, and on the other hand, on the specific theoretical level of the self-understanding, self-constitution and self-assertion of esotericism. Number 2. On the historical level of culture, the universalism of esotericism consists of its tendency to transgress traditional, conventional differences and borders of cultural identity. Universalism means here the transculturality of esotericism. Number 3. On the theoretical level of self-constitution of esotericism, universalism characterizes the conception of esotericism as a discursive formation situated between religion and science, between belief systems and knowledge systems. And here actually I have the problem that science is not what I mean, it's more knowledge. In German it's easier, science is Wissenschaft, and Wissenschaft means knowledge and science. So I mean more knowledge. That's why I talk about knowledge systems.
Move to Latin, it's the same skills.
Yeah, exactly. We can move to Latin with great pleasure. Esotericism Esotericism as a belief system now is universal insofar as it claims to overcome the boundaries of conventional and traditional religious paradigms and to establish hybrid, syncretistic, and trans-religious forms of religion. I think that's the aspect that we want to discuss here mainly. But again, my introduction is broad. I want to locate this kind of universalism into other kinds. Namely, especially the next one, number 5, esotericism as a knowledge system, not as a belief system, but as a knowledge system, is universal insofar as it is based on a strong claim of knowledge that not only tends to overcome the conventional boundaries between religion and science, or knowledge in general, but also between different disciplines and heterogeneous fields of knowledge in particular. The epistemology of esotericism forms a fragmentary universalism. I come back to this notion. So to sum up the introduction to my introduction, one can differentiate between 3 types of universalism in esotericism: A, a transcultural universalism; B, a trans-religious universalism; and C, an epistemic universalism. Let me now elaborate on these 3 forms of universalism a bit more, however still in the very generalizing, abstract and fragmentary way of thesis. So now actually I come to the 3 theses in the core. This was the introduction, the 3 theses, 3 types of universalism. First, the transcultural universalism of esotericism. This is kind of repetitive at what I said in the first sentence. The cultural universalism of esotericism is based on its transgression of conventional borders of culture and nation. Now this has to be differentiated. First, esotericism can be characterized ex negativo as opposition to cultural homogeneity. While exoteric and conventional religious systems tend toward cultural singularity and identity, esoteric paradigms, in contrary, tend towards cultural plurality by transgressing the limits of established and conventional cultural entities, like, for example, the European and the Asian, Jewish and Christian, and so on. Second, the transcultural tendency of esotericism needed to be differentiated historically, but can be done here, of course, only in a very rough way. Only one difference I want to make. Until early modernity, concepts of nationality and culture were broader and less defining, whereas concepts of religion were much stricter and more defining. In modernity, however, religion got less defining, whereas the more did culture and nationality. Against this historical backdrop, esotericism's tendency has to be situated, esotericism's transcultural tendency has to be situated in the complex force field of the construction of identities in religion, nation, and, culture. Number 3. In the centripetal force field of identity, esotericism comes in as a centrifugal transgressive force that questions any kind of fixed identity, be it religious, cultural, or national. The centrifugal transgressive force of esotericism varies in quantity and quality. The transcultural universalism of esotericism grows with its centrifugal tendency. Esoteric transculturality may expand in just one direction. This is the case, for example, in the esoteric Orientalism or in Christian Kabbalah. The esoteric centrifugal force can also move to several directions at the same time and thus integrate in a polyphonic way heterogeneous cultures. This is characteristic, for example, in modern occultism, and I think, for example, also in theosophy. Now, the second thesis, the trans-religious universalism of esotericism. Religion in esotericism is not limited to homogeneous, conventional, and traditional systems. It much more strives to bridge the gaps and to intermingle traditional religious paradigms, and thus to create new hybrid forms of religion. This means, again, ex negativo first, more or less liberal or radical dismissal of traditional and conventional large religious paradigms, like, for example, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and so on. This dismissal leads to a more or less strong rejection of esotericism, from outside, of course. It provokes its polemical exclusion from the religious paradigms as heresy or superstition. Number 3, esotericism itself, however, tends to establish more general, hybrid, syncretistic, trans-religious forms of religion. They are universal precisely in just this sense of hybridization, as blending and confounding various elements of various religions. As an example of this may serve the so-called Great Wheel of William Butler Yeats' A Vision, with its aim to bring together the Occidental and the Oriental religions in one large esoteric system. I spoke very roughly about this in the introduction to the last SV conference we had. Now the third and last thesis, namely the epistemic universalism of esotericism. Esotericism is characterized by a self-conscious epistemic quality, namely its strong claim of knowledge that tends to universality. Do you say claim of knowledge or claim for knowledge? I was actually not sure.
Both will have different meanings. So it depends.
Yeah,
Sounds okay.
it sounds okay. That's the most important. Okay, the strong claim of knowledge. Der Wissensanspruch in German.
Two knowledge.
To knowledge. Okay. So sorry about that. I'm really not sure how to speak. Number 1, the knowledge claim of esotericism becomes visible ex negativo. You see, I begin always with ex negativo, by a comparison with mystical theology. Mysticism is carried by an elementary skepticism in regard to knowledge about the world, man, nature, whatever. In categorical opposition against knowledge, mysticism posits a non-knowing, like, for example, the famous text, The Cloud of Unknowing. While mysticism sacrifices any positive knowledge in favor of the interiority of faith, up to the silence of negation, and here we can talk about Meister Eckhart, of course. Esotericism presents itself with a supreme optimism of knowledge, no less self-consciously than the modern sciences. This optimism of knowledge is manifested in many ways. For example, in the claim of secret, arcane knowledge, of higher, sublime knowledge, of primordial knowledge, especially, however, in the claim of absolute and total knowledge, a knowledge which is all-encompassing, encyclopedic, and thus universal. And now I said I won't talk about examples, and I give here 2 examples to conclude. An example of this epistemic universalism of esotericism can be seen in the interpretation of Kabbalah in European history of ideas. Latin as Ars Kabbalistica, as Reuchlin called it, or Scientia Kabbalistica, as Pica de la Mirandola named it. The Kabbalah likewise could be understood as the claim not just for secret knowledge, but also for universal knowledge, like, for example, in pre-modern semiotics and mathematics. In this way, Kabbalah turned into an encyclopedic technique of knowledge generation in the semiotics and combinatorics from Lull to Leibniz, Here, Kabbalah was expected to provide the linguistic method for attaining universal knowledge. And the second and last example is the ars notoria. The esotericism optimism of knowledge is taken to an extreme in the medieval ars notoria, about which Thomas von Aquin wrote and others, which claims to attain the absolute and promises the whole knowledge, all the artes and scientiae, in a very short period of time with the help of magical incantation. The figure of Dr. Faustus is a modern type of this magical esoteric universalist. In this sense, esotericism, universalism is governed by the Faustian desire for total knowledge. So these are my theses. Let's see how we can discuss them. Maybe there is something to discuss. Oh, okay, thank you.